Greetings, greetings, greetings. Happy new days, beloved, and welcome to the best days of your life. Today, we are talking about It Didn't Start With You. Okay? It Didn't Start With You by Mark Woland is a book about inherited traumas and transgenerational traumas, right? And we're on chapter 2. There's a video that was posted earlier that is literally titled It Didn't Start With You. So if you want to check it out from the beginning, you can. But the book is so remarkable that each chapter, something so profound is discussed, and the conversation is so well thought out. You can pretty much just jump in wherever, okay? And so, chapter 2 is titled Three Generations of Shared Family History, the Family Body. And it starts off with a quote from Carl Wang, and he is a psychoanalyst. And I want to say his works, I want to say he died in the 1960s. Yeah, he died in the 1960s. So his work is from we'll say like the early 1900s or like 1930s. He has a lot of work from that time period. Okay, I feel very strongly that I am under the influence of things or questions which were left incomplete and unanswered by my parents and grandparents and more distant ancestors. It often seems as if there were an impersonal karma within a family, which is passed on from parents to children. It has always seemed to me that I had to complete or perhaps continue things which previous ages had left unfinished. And I think most of us have that feeling, that natural feeling of just being connected to individuals that we didn't quite meet don't don't know. Or you feel as though you may have like this plethora of information and data and you're like, where did this come from? Or you may be feeling these certain emotions and feelings and triggers to certain situations, but not really having a clear understanding why. And so for me, I saw that happening a lot in my life with my maternal grandmother. And as I became older, I would hear people reference that I was like her and that we were so similar and that just the things that I would do was similar to her. And so early on, I found myself being a part of certain movements that were definitely driven to equality in New Orleans, right? And so being a part of these movements, I found out my grandmother's connection and her being a Black Panther, and you wondering, these burning passions inside of you and just being able to make the connections and see it. And so other things that I had heard, like I had opened up a store, and then I would receive notice like, oh, your grandmother had this type of store. And it's like oftentimes our family just don't voluntarily pass on this information. And so we're not really sure why we're having certain feelings, emotions, and triggers and thought patterns. And we're trying to discover like, why am I feeling this way? And this is even more problematic when we don't have connections to our parents, right? And when I say connections to our parents, some of us are unable to simply call our mom or call our father and ask about grandparents and ask about great grandparents. Some of us is really hard to track down our family history, right? So we're going to go ahead and jump in. Chapter 2. The history you share with your family begins before you are even conceived. In your earliest biological form as a unfertilized egg, you already share a cellular environment with your mother and grandmother. Very important, right? So this is another reason why chemically we literally can be born with our parents' anxieties and depressions and fears, right? Even on a chemical level. So that's something, very profound to point out, just opening. When your grandmother was 5 months pregnant with your mother, the cell of the egg you developed from was already present in your mother's ovaries. This means that before your mother was even born, your mother, your grandmother, and the earlier traces of you were in the same body. Ooh. 3 generations sharing the same biological environment. So no wonder I would sometimes um have behavior patterns that would remind people so much of my grandmother, right? Perfect example here. This isn't a new ideal. Textbooks have told us as much for more than a century. You can be similarly traced in your paternal line. The cells of the sperm you developed from were present in your father when he was a fetus in your mother's womb. With what we've now learning from the Yuhande studies and others about the ways stress can be inherited, we can begin to map out how the biological residues of traumas your grandmother experienced can be passed down with far-reaching consequences. There is, however, a significant biological difference in the evolution of the egg and sperm. Your father's sperm continued to multiply when he reached puberty, whereas your mother was born with her lifetime supply of eggs. Once her egg cells were formed in your grandmother's womb, that cell line stopped dividing. So, 12 to 40 or so years later, one of those eggs, fertilized by your father's sperm, eventually developed into who you are today. In either case, both egg and sperm cells, science now tells us, can be imprinted by events with the potential to affect generations. Because your father's sperm continues to develop through adolescence and adulthood, this sperm continues to be imprinted by traumatic experiences. Ooh, that is profound, right? So imagine how, so we say, okay, your father conceived when he was 22 years old. That sperm is carrying all of his experiences. Isn't that beautiful? Wow. Okay. Scientists originally believed that our parents' genes, the blueprint from which we were created, and that with just the right amount of guidance and nutrients, we would develop according to plan. We now know that our blueprint is merely the starting point, as influences from environment from as early as conception begin to shape us emotionally, psychologically, and biologically, and this shaping continues throughout our lives. Okay, that's pretty important too, right? And so let's go back and see the influences they say that shape the genetic blueprint, right? And so the first one they name is environment. Very important. They're talking about how environment impacts the genes and the blueprint to our makeup. And to our makeup is how our brain functions, how we interact with each other, and how we interact with the world. So when we look at environment on a whole, most of us are not coming from stable environments. And we might say, well, why are we not coming from stable environments? Most of us are from poverty stricken environments will make our mindset a copy of the environment. So if the environment is based upon survival, based upon fear like mindsets, these concepts are going to be displayed in our behavior and thinking patterns, right? Okay, and so next, moving past environment is from early as conception, right? So we think about myself, me becoming pregnant as a high schooler, as a teenage girl. And so we're thinking about the fear that came with that experience, the fear and the shame that can now be passed on to the fetus, right? And then the fetus grows and can still be carrying the same fear and shame that the mother carried while carrying the child, right? While pregnant. And so begin in these experiences, right, that environmental influence, the influences of the mother and father begin to shape us emotionally, psychologically, and biologically, right? Great points. Okay, so we're gonna move forward. According to Linton, the mother's emotions, such as fear, anger, love, hope, among others, can be biochemically alter the genetic expression of her offspring. Just was discussing this, right? So, oh wow. I promise I did not know that was coming. So I'm literally just thinking about my own experience is becoming pregnant so early and it not being a joyous moment for me, and how that impacted me and then impacted the child on a chemical level. And then yes, this alters the expression and blueprint of the fetus. So during pregnancy, nutrients in the mother's blood nurtures the fetus through the wall of the placenta. With the nutrients, she also releases a host of hormones and information signals generated by the emotion she experiences. Oh, very important. And this can tell you a lot right here, because I would like to make the conclusion that since so many of us, and so many of us are born out of wedlock, so many of us are um born in conditions where our parents have not, this is not a planned pregnancy, you know because of all the emotions that come with that. These emotions are passed on to the fetus. Very, this it says a lot. It would say to me, this really speaks volumes on the emotions that many of us feel early on as children. Just not, some of us not feeling wanted. A lot of us didn't feel wanted because that emotion was something that our parents was carrying, and then that was passed on. And also that emotion grew for us because sometimes we dealt with an absentee parent, and sometimes our parents are there physically, but then on an emotional level they're really disconnected. And we already understand that the disconnection between parents and children is because of so many worldly stresses, right? The parent being overworked, underpaid, the parent dealing with their own anxieties and depressions and unresolved mental health issues. So the cycle is so thick. It literally is going to be the undoing of these patterns from generation to generation. So, if it starts with our generation, we hope to see a little bit unraveling of this, right? Of this PTSD. And then the next generation, they produce more unraveling of it, right? So that's the hope, that we continue to do some work, right? And the end goal, most of us don't know what that looks like. So that's why I'm always like focused on feeling better, focus on the situation becoming better. Okay, so here we go. Chronic emotions like anger and fear can imprint her child, essentially preparing or pre programming how the child will adapt to its environment. So if the mom is constantly like, oh my God, what I'm gonna do, which I really do believe most women are not having children in the most joyous emotions. And I'm only saying that because of the statistics that we see. The statistics are saying that most pregnant women are dealing with hypertension. They're unhealthy, they're overweight. So when we're looking at aspects like that, we can conclude that most babies are not being born out of the emotions of love, light, happiness, and prosperity, and just confidence, and happy to be procreating. So here we go. And those emotions are pre-programming the child. Can you imagine that shame, fear, sadness, and hurt that I was experiencing as a pregnant teenage girl? I was literally feeding my fetus those emotions. I was pre-programming my child how to adapt into the environment. So before the child even got to here in the physical form, I was already teaching it how to live in the state of sadness and fear and low vibrations. Right? Okay. So here we go. Limpton explains when stress hormones cross the human placenta, they cause fatal blood vessels to be more constricted, sending more blood, preparing the fetus for a fight flight behavior response. Wow. Can you imagine how many of us don't even know this information, don't even realize how those emotions were literally feeding to our child, the sadness, the negative thought patterns, the negative self-talk, before we're even verbalizing to them on a chemical biological level. These are the pre-programming that we're giving children. In that sense, a child who experienced a stressful environment can become reactive in a similar manner, becoming more stressful. There are numerous studies documenting how a pregnant mother's stress, even as early as the first trimester, can affect her child. Very important. I think we're gonna end it with that. And this is just, I think, a quarter of chapter two. This is just a quarter of chapter two, but I feel like there's so much to digest. And for us, it really gives us a second to just reflect on what was your mom's experience while she was pregnant. If I just reflect on mine, my mom's experience while she was pregnant, my father and her had already broken up. So she went through pregnancy alone, right? And then when we see the connection between that experience my mom had and then my experience I had with my first pregnancy, and seeing how that cycle of trauma continued, how I experienced, my pregnancy, and how there's so many correlations between her experience and my experience. Ooh, this is deep. So when you think about, okay, were my mom and father happy when conceiving me? When I was a fetus, was I poured into? Was my parents constantly just giving praises to me, excited that I was on the way, just thinking about how prosperous my life will be? The trauma runs deep, and you get to see how it starts so early on, before you're even physically thought about, before you're even conceived, when you're literally just an embryo in your mother's fetus, while that fetus is inside your grandmother. Enjoy your beautiful days, loved ones.